My lords, Lord Jenkins of Hillhead died on Sunday last at the age of 82. Roy Harris Jenkins was born on Armistice Day, 1920. He grew to be one of the most influential political figures of the 20th century. Politics ran in his family. He was the son of Arthur Jenkins, Member of Parliament for Pontypool, 1935 to 1946. His father had gone to work as quite a small child down the pit and was later unjustly imprisoned for his political activities. Lord Jenkins read PPE at Balliol, where he took a first, having had the inestimable benefit of a grounding in education at Abersychan Grammar School. My lords, during the winter of 1940, he and some of his friends began to feel they were the only members of the Labour Club at Oxford not committed to the Communist Party line. Lord Jenkins therefore took part in a split from the Labour Club to help form a breakaway organisation. His main memory of that move was a long correspondence with his opposite number in the old Labour Club, Iris Murdoch. Murdoch would write, "Dear Comrade Jenkins." He would reply, "Dear Miss Murdoch." 47 years on, he was able to award her an honorary degree from Oxford University. He was a captain in the Royal Artillery, worked as a code breaker on the Enigma machine. During that period, he became committed absolutely to the idea of a united Europe. He entered the Commons in 1948 and soon became one of the most powerful and formidable debaters in that chamber. He became a minister in 1964. In 1965, when he was only 45, he was appointed Home Secretary by Mr. Wilson. Very pleased to be the youngest in that grave office since Churchill in 1910, he was a Liberal Home Secretary. He worked tirelessly to remove flogging from the penal code and the prison discipline system. He liberalised, or helped to liberalise, the law relating to homosexuality, divorce, abortion and immigration. He abolished theatre censorship. He was responsible for broader laws against racial discrimination, and he introduced the concept of suspended sentences and majority verdicts, both of which were extremely controversial at the time, and yet the latter certainly proved a great success. Mr. Wilson appointed him Chancellor of the Exchequer in November 1967. It was a very difficult time. The pound had been devalued. In his 3 years of service in that great office, he instituted a programme of austerity to resolve the financial crisis. His party's position on Europe at that time was at odds with his personal views. In defiance of the party majority, he supported Britain's entry into the European Community. In 1972, he resigned as deputy leader when the party seemed to be turning its back on Europe. In 1977, he became president of the European Commission, having successfully led the referendum campaign in this country. In 1981, he became one of the Gang of Four, who co-founded the Social Democratic Party as a proposed and anticipated alternative to the Labour Party. His 3 co-founders are, of course, all now members of this House. He became Lord Jenkins of Hillhead in 1987, and perhaps one of the most distinct and discreet pleasures of his life, Chancellor of his own university in the same year. My lords, as well as being one of the key political figures of the 20th century, if that were not enough achievement for a single life, he was a prolific and successful author. His works on Gladstone, Dilke, Asquith, House of Lords Reform, and latterly his bestseller Churchill, show to us all a man with a deep historical as well as a significant literary gift. He knew that politics is not simply the art of the possible, but it is also the science of the moment. But both, he knew, had consciously to be located in a wider, more profound historical context. In his autobiography, he summed up the House of Lords by saying, I quote, "It is rather like Adlai Stevenson's comment on flattery. It is all right, provided you do not inhale." My lords, I think he did inhale a little. He certainly added to the fun of life here, as well as to the nature of politics. He had many accomplishments. He was not a Welsh speaker. There is a good phrase in that ancient language, dyna ddyn, such a man that was. My lords, we shall miss him a good deal, and more than we presently understand, and we send deep condolences to those he loved and cared for.
My lords, it's a privilege to follow the tribute paid by the leader of the House to the noble Lord Jenkins of Hillhead. There appear in politics from time to time people whose career and influence stretch far beyond the confines of a single party, and Lord Jenkins was such a man. Can anyone in the 20th century who did not become Prime Minister have exercised such a major impact on our politics? By his resolute chancellorship, he saved the Labour Party as a party of government after the devaluation of 1967. Along with the noble lords, Lord Rodgers of Quarry Bank and Lord Owen, and the noble Baroness, Lady Williams of Crosby, he pointed the way to the future for the Labour Party a dozen years before that was recognised and accepted in Labour ranks. My lords, the charge was also laid that the noble Lord Jenkins, by forming the SDP, had made Thatcherism possible. My lords, I would not necessarily see that as a vice in the noble lord. But he was, with typical farsightedness, reacting to a reality, namely that state-led socialism was a dead end and radical reform was needed for Britain to prosper. Roy Jenkins was never afraid of change. Being a son of a Welsh miner, he presented as a quintessential Englishman, and for 5 years after 1982 became a Scot. It is a little remembered fact that Hillhead, the seat of his great by-election win, was represented for nearly 35 years until 1982 by my father. So little remembered, in fact, that when Roy Jenkins was telephoned and told Galbraith has died, he thought it was the economist J.K. Galbraith rather than his passport back to Westminster. Obviously, my lords, I see Hillhead in a very personal light, but no one could doubt the courage and conviction with which the noble lord threw himself into the uphill battle for that unlikely seat. He was always a man of courage and also one of deep and lasting convictions. Like them or not, his great and often controversial reforms as Home Secretary in the 1960s will last, and like it or not, he took bold, public and often unpopular stands on issues such as deeper European integration, proportional representation or entry into the euro, over which he did not hesitate and from which he did not waver. His term as President of the European Union reflected the deep respect for the noble lord right across Europe. His cherished chancellorship of Oxford reflected his deep love for Oxford and his distinguished achievements as a historian. Like Rosebery's memoir of Lord Randolph Churchill, his books on Asquith and Winston Churchill will live long as rare examples of great political biographies by a leading politician. It is perhaps no accident that Asquith and Churchill thrived in eras when parties were made and unmade, and great issues scored across the conventional lines of politics. The noble Lord Jenkins, lived in such a time. He helped, in fact, to mould that time, and that he was also a person of such charm and humour and zest for life, and someone of such unashamed enjoyment of the good things and the civilized virtues, make him a man all of us who had the good fortune to know him will long remember. My lords, our hearts go out to his family and his friends, but they can take consolation in the remarkable journey on which Roy Jenkins led them and the respect and affection that he won.
My lords, from these benches and on behalf of Lady Williams of Crosby, who is abroad, we're grateful for the Lord Privy Seal's remarks about Lord Jenkins, and we share the love and sadness of his wife Jennifer and of his family. Lord Jenkins of Hillhead, Roy Jenkins, was a statesman and a man of letters of Victorian proportions and many things besides. The noble and learned Lord has set out his career and achievements, and Lord Strathclyde has added his own generous comments. But above all else, Roy Jenkins has had a great capacity for friendship and loyalty. In return, he could draw warmth and affection beyond expectations. His death leaves a huge gap in the lives of many of us. It will not be the same again. Lord Jenkins last attended the House on the 7th of November, when illness was casting a shadow over his plans. But he hoped that with progress, he would return to Westminster soon after the end of the recess. Meanwhile, he continued to follow the pages of Hansard, even including the licensing bill on committee. Rather less surprising, he would join with us his visitors for a genial lunch either at his home in East Hendred or in a well-chosen country pub. He was working on an article about Hugh Gaitskell, the 40th death of which falls later this month. And on last Friday, when his immediate problem had apparently been resolved, he signed a contract for yet another book, in this case about J.F. Kennedy. Just over 2 years ago, when faced with cardiac surgery, he recognized the possibility that he might not be able to complete his book on Churchill. But he recovered, and astonishingly, he was very soon writing again 500 words a day. When it was completed, it was a triumph. He was a Member of Parliament in either the House of Commons or the Lords for almost 50 years, only for a break when he was President of the European Commission. In the 1950s, it was a bleak political prospect for backbenchers in opposition, but he attended almost every day and piloted through his private member's bill on the reform of the law of obscene publications. Even in 1972, when he resigned as deputy leader of the Labour Party, he was determined to rebuild his outstanding reputation in parliamentary debate. Later again, in 1986, after another difficult time, he was chosen as Spectator Bencher of the Year. He was resilient throughout his career. Lord Jenkins led the Liberal Democrats in the House of Lords with great distinction, for almost 10 years, and he continued to attend the House on most days, though, as he put it, I do not often trouble noble lords these days. In fact, as we know, most noble lords were happy to be troubled with Lord Jenkins, whether remaining on the benches or coming into the chamber to listen. He made a characteristic speech about reform of the Lords a year ago, on the 10th of January. Another speech, his last, on his fears about war on Iraq, was on the 24th of September. Both were very different, but both were rich in quality. My lords, all his speeches had much in common. He would find historic analogies. He would find humor and especially paradox. He would find precision of words, usually some unexpected ones. And above all, he would demonstrate the force of argument. And most of his speeches were short. He was rather proud about that. Some speeches were said to be magisterial and others said to be baroque. But they were all written in his own hand, his own speeches set down carefully on cards. He also had a rather special gesture of his own difficult to describe and difficult to copy, although we all tried. I'm tempted, my lords, to set down again his distinguished record as a reforming and civilised Home Secretary, as a tough Chancellor of the Exchequer in difficult economic times, his Charlemagne's Prize, his role as Chancellor of Oxford University, and his Order of Merit. Then there was his special relationship with the United States, which he found no contradiction about his strong European ties. And there was his crucial role as one of the founding fathers of the SDP and the Liberal Democrats. But, my lord, the catalogue is much too long on this occasion. Lord Jenkins was a great luncher, never on his own, and sometimes in the Barry Room. And his evenings during the week were filled with social and literary occasions. And he was also in demand, if I can put it that way, with those who wanted a stylish, well-chosen oration at a memorial service. Lord Jenkins died after 9 a.m., shortly after 9 a.m. on Sunday, 2 days ago. During the previous evening, he was putting the final touches to another book on Franklin Roosevelt. My lords, I think he would like one of those anecdotes about him with which he so enriched and entertained his own biographies. At breakfast on Sunday, his wife Jennifer asked him what he would like. The reply became his last words: "I would like 2 eggs, lightly poached." Royal Jenkins would have enjoyed that.
Crossbenches, it's a pleasure to endorse and thank the 3 speeches that have come from the 3 political parties. It's, for me, a particular pleasure to follow Lord Rodgers of Quarry Bank, who was undoubtedly Roy's longest-standing friend, a frank friend and a faithful friend, and someone who has contributed greatly to his political life. I don't want to cover all the different things that have been said today in the House, and I speak only of 2 legacies. One, a permanent legacy, and that is his contribution to Britain's membership of the European Community. I suppose 3 people will be judged by history to have taken this country fully into the European Union. Prime Minister Edward Heath, for getting us through the parliamentary legislation, Prime Minister Wilson for carrying the full-hearted consent to the British people in the referendum. But without the contribution of Roy Jenkins, we would certainly never have gone through at that time. And Lord Rodgers played a very crucial part in rallying 69 Labour MPs to vote, a very difficult vote in very difficult circumstances. I admit I was rather tempted at the time by an abstention, but he convinced me unequivocally that that would be falling below the level of events. And then when he resigned as deputy leader, when again it was tempting, and I was tempted, to go for the referendum amendment which we were being asked to support, and he made it abundantly clear that if we did this, we would ditch our chances of going in. At that particular time, we had to face the issue that the parliamentary authority had to be sustained. And from the moment that he resigned, any doubt that we were going to go in was over. So it was a great achievement, and he followed it as president of the Commission and in many other ways. That, I think, is a permanent legacy, one of which he historically will be extremely proud. The other legacy is a difficult legacy to be sure it will last. As a crossbencher now, it's interesting watching the political parties all exaggerate the divisions. But in the 80s, there was no exaggeration of the divisions in party politics. They were immensely deep. They covered every aspect of our political life: the defense policy, the foreign policy, and the economic policy. Now looking back, and how long this will last I do not know, but certainly for the decade of the 90s, there has been, of course, genuine and real differences of opinion, and long may they last, and they are the stuff of politics and of democracy. But the bitterness, the division, the inability to try and find the consensus and the common ground, that was absent, perhaps in the 70s, but certainly all through the 80s. In his Dimbleby speech, in being the first leader of the SDP, and in being an SDP MP for 5 years, Roy helped that party and the country to make what I hope will be a long legacy at least, of ending that raw, vicious divisiveness which damaged our country, which damaged our economic strength, which damaged our political weight in the world. And I would like to think that that would be as an important legacy as the legacy that he gave to this country for our membership of the European community.
My lords, from these benches, I want to say quite simply, but as strongly as I can, that we will miss Lord Jenkins. His was indeed a life at the centre, as the title of his autobiography puts it. His was a presence we felt on the benches opposite, even when he was just sitting there quietly. Despite, or perhaps because of his very great distinction, he was, from a personal point of view, not just friendly, but enormously and warmly encouraging. Of his political career, I make a single point: his willingness to put his democratic principles to the test by standing for election. Whatever future historians may make of his decision to leave the Labour Party and found the SDP, he was prepared to go to Warrington and to Glasgow to ascertain the will of the people. In a similar spirit, he was willing to submit himself for election as Chancellor of the University of Oxford, a post which we know gave him the most enormous pride and pleasure. Of his role within this House, some words of Dean Stanley, which he quoted about Gladstone's parliamentary style, apply no less to him. Stanley wrote, "One great charm of his speaking is its exceeding good humour. There is great vehemence, but no bitterness." At a more trivial level, I always marvelled at his capacity to read his notes in the most minuscule handwriting on tiny cards. And when he was clearly having great difficulty reading them, as it were, allowing the eloquence of his body to carry him through. Finally, there is his style as a person and as a writer, as befits someone who was president of the Royal Society of Literature. My fellow bishop, the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of St Albans, has described one sentence in his book on Gladstone as laced with self-deprecating irony and a charming and paradoxical immodesty. One of my favourite sentences occurs in his biography of Churchill. In 1915, Churchill went on holiday to a farmhouse in what was then countryside near Godalming. "We lived very simply here," he wrote to his brother on the 19th of June, "but with all the essentials of life well understood and well provided for. Hot baths, cold champagne, new peas, and old brandy." This combination of relish for the simple pleasures of life, described in such an elegant and finely balanced sentence, entirely fits the late Lord Jenkins. His was a constructive, productive life right to the end. As the noble Lord Rodgers has already pointed out to the House, he signed a contract for a major biography only last Friday. So our sympathy goes out to Dame Jennifer and other members of his family and his very close friends, as we thank God for his outstanding achievements in so many spheres, and for the fact that his life, lived with such vigour and purpose, enhanced the political life of the nation in so many ways. My prayer is that as he enjoyed the hospitality of the earth, so he might, with even greater relish, enjoy the hospitality of heaven.
What I would like to add a very brief footnote to the eloquent tributes which have been paid dealing with Lord Jenkins and his interest in higher education. When the Earl of Stockton died in December of 1986, the University of Oxford lost its Chancellor. I was then the Vice-Chancellor, and we organised the election. It was a three-cornered fight in which Lord Jenkins, as you've heard, noble lord, won the contest. Mention has been made of style. When Lord Jenkins assumed office, he organised a special degree ceremony, as the rubric said in the Gazette, to mark the start of the period of office of the new Chancellor of the University. And you will be the judges of whether this list of those who received degrees is characteristic of the Jenkins style. He began with 2 degrees by diploma. The first was His Majesty King Baudouin, Knight of the Garter, King of the Belgians. His second, His Excellency Professor Francesco Cossiga, President of the Italian Republic. He then moved to the second tier, honorary degrees. In the list, in civil law, Doctor of Civil Law, the former Taoiseach of Ireland, Dr. Garrett Fitzgerald. Then across the Atlantic, Robert McNamara, former President of the World Bank. Then one of our own ambassadors, a close friend, an ambassador in 4 embassies, Warsaw, Bonn, Paris and Washington, you will have guessed, Sir Nicholas Henderson. Doctor of Letters, Sir Isaiah Berlin, Order of Merit. Dame, but not comrade, Iris Murdoch. Arthur Schlesinger, Jr. Then Doctor of Science, Emeritus Professor Dorothy Hodgkin, Order of Merit. Well, that gives you the flavour of the list and of the Jenkins style within the university. Others were included in the list for reasons of piety or tradition. On becoming a member of this House, the noble lord threw his energies into trying to improve the Education Reform Bill, which was then passing through this House, and made many notable contributions to that. I will refer to one only, and that is what became known as the Jenkins Amendment, a clause on academic freedom. If you recall, academic tenure was being abolished, the fears being expressed in the university that this would lead to people being pushed out of their posts if they were writing heterodox or controversial views or experimenting in doubtful areas. And a great alarm was being spread. And Lord Jenkins moved the amendment, which embodied these simple words that the university commissioners, to whom relevant powers were given, must have regard to the need, and I quote, to ensure that academic staff have freedom within the law to question and test received wisdom, to put forward new ideas and controversial or unpopular opinions without placing themselves in jeopardy of losing their jobs or privileges they may have at their institutions. That was put to a vote, and by quite a narrow majority in this House, it was carried. Surprisingly, no subsequent effort was made in another place to remove it once it was there. Perhaps it was thought it would be like voting against motherhood. But that passage stood, and Lord Jenkins gave tremendous support to the academic community by having achieved that. He made many subsequent contributions to education bills, but I say nothing of that today. Back at Oxford, he was an outstanding chancellor, as everybody agrees. He was dignified and witty on all public occasions, and behind the scenes and in private, he was a constant support, a friend, and a wise counsellor to successive vice-chancellors.
The Lord Howell of Guildford.
I beg leave to ask questions now in my name on the order paper.